It was 7:30 in the morning, and I was standing in my own kitchen with a coffee cup in hand. The steam curled upward, but my focus wasn't on the drink. My son and his wife had positioned themselves at the doorway, their bodies angled in a way that made the room feel smaller, almost like guards in a hallway. I remember the way my heart slowed, not raced, because by then I already knew what was coming. Their smiles carried something sharp, a warning wrapped in sweetness. Most people would have panicked in that moment, but I felt an odd calm. After weeks of listening, observing, and preparing, I realized I wasn't the one trapped. They were. I glanced at the decorative bowl on the counter, the one hiding a secret. If only they knew who I was really talking to that morning. My name is Marion Brooks. I am 72 years old, a widow, and for most of my life, I worked as a school secretary. After my husband Frank passed away, the evenings felt endless and the silence pressed in. At 7:15 in the evening one night, I packed a suitcase and moved into my son Jason's home, believing family would be the answer to grief. For a while, I told myself it was. I cooked meals, helped with the kids, paid my share each month, and kept busy enough not to think too hard about the empty space Frank left behind. But living under the same roof doesn't always mean living in safety. Sometimes, family closeness hides cracks you don't notice until you're standing right on top of them. Life in Jason and Brianna's house looked comfortable enough from the outside. I had a small bedroom upstairs with a window that caught the morning sun. Most evenings, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and I tried to make myself useful so no one would feel I was a burden. I paid $800 each month. I helped fold laundry, and I was the one who kept an eye on Noah's part-time schedule and Lily's homework. Jason carried himself with the same boyish charm he'd had as a teenager. And for a long time, I wanted to believe it came from his father's integrity. Brianna always looked polished, her hair perfect, her outfits sharp. But there was a tension behind her smile that made me wonder what it cost to keep up appearances. The kids were my bright spots. Noah was working hard to save for college, and Lily, only 13, had a way of treating me like more than just someone old living in the house. Around them, I felt needed, but little things began to unsettle me. Sometimes Brianna would mention how much extra the groceries cost. Sometimes Jason would suggest senior communities as if they were giving me options for fun, not exile. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself families make comments. But the words lingered longer than I expected. It was around 12:30 at night when I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet, but the walls in that home were thinner than most people realized. As I passed the hallway near Jason and Brianna's bedroom, I caught their voices hushed, but sharp enough to carry. What I heard froze me in place. They weren't just talking about bills or stress. They were talking about me, about the cost of having me there, about how much extra the groceries and utilities added up, and about how maybe I should be placed in a senior facility. The words power of attorney slipped out like a casual solution, as if my freedom and choices could be signed away on a piece of paper. I stood there in the dark, barely breathing. In that moment, it struck me they didn't see me as a person who had raised Jason, or as the grandmother who loved Noah and Lily. They saw me as a problem to be managed, an expense to be reduced. That realization cut deeper than anything else. Not long after that night, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. Little details stood out, like papers left on Jason's desk. One afternoon, when I was dropping off clean laundry, I saw bank statements lying in plain sight. The numbers told a story that words had only hinted at. They weren't just struggling. They were drowning. over $47,000 in credit card debt, 3 months behind on the mortgage, and car payments on vehicles far beyond what they could really afford. I wanted to feel compassion after all. Financial pressure can break even the strongest families. But what struck me most was how they had started calculating my presence as if I were part of that debt. My room, my meals, even my existence seemed to be tallied up like an expense line they couldn't afford. That thought gnawed at me. I had given years of love, of work, of sacrifice. And suddenly, I felt reduced to a number in someone else's budget. It was a quiet heartbreak, the kind that doesn't show on your face, but keeps you awake at night. It was 2:10 in the afternoon when I stopped at a small convenience store on my way home. I can't explain why I bought that lottery ticket. It wasn't hope that pushed me. It was defiance. $5 felt like a rebellion against being treated like a cost to be cut. A quiet protest that reminded me I still had choices. A few days later, I stood in that same parking lot staring at numbers on a screen. My ticket had matched every single one. $127 million? After taxes, $63,400,000 sat waiting to be claimed. I remember gripping the steering wheel and feeling not joy, but an avalanche of questions. What would I do with power this large? Where would I go? Who would I become? Most people would have packed a bag, found a lawyer, and disappeared into a new life. But I didn't want to escape. I wanted something more than distance. I wanted truth. I wanted justice. I needed the world to see who Jason and Brianna really were when they thought I had nothing. That's when I reached out to Alex Rivera, a journalist I'd seen reporting on elder abuse. Over coffee downtown, I told him everything. He listened, then nodded slowly. His advice was simple if I wanted proof. We would need documentation, cameras, audio, patience. While Jason and Brianna were at work and the kids were at school, Alex's team carefully moved through the house. Tiny cameras slipped into picture frames, microphones tucked into everyday objects, and a small device hidden inside that decorative bowl on the counter. Everything connected to encrypted drives I kept locked away. I learned to charge batteries the way other people learn recipes, noting times and cycles so nothing failed when it mattered most. My quiet routines became cover for a different kind of work. Every casserole in the oven, every folded towel, every trip to the grocery store was paired with a hidden mission: gather evidence, not provoke it. I promised myself I wouldn't try to push them into mistakes. I would simply let the cameras reveal who they already were. It started subtly, almost kindly. Jason sat across from me one evening, his voice steady, telling me how busy his work was becoming, how the hours were stretching longer. Brianna joined in with her polished reassurance, suggesting that maybe I would be happier in a place with people my own age, where activities filled the afternoons and meals were provided. On the surface, it sounded like concern, but underneath, I felt the push, a gentle exile wrapped in soft words. They spoke of independence, as though removing me from the house would give me more freedom. They talked about space, as though I had somehow filled too much of theirs. The truth became clear when money entered the conversation. Suddenly, $2,000 a month was the figure they believed I should pay if I wanted to stay twice what I had already been giving. My social security was nowhere near enough to cover that. They knew it, and yet they said it as if it were logical, as if family came with invoices. I listened, kept my face calm, and told myself the cameras were catching it all. What mattered wasn't how I defended myself. What mattered was letting the mask slip on its own. A week later, I decided it was time to see how quickly their masks would fall. With the help of a trusted friend, we staged a simple phone call in the middle of the day. The message was harmless enough I might have won $25,000 up front and $1,000 a week for life. I made sure Jason and Brianna overheard. I played the part of a confused woman, unsure if it was real or just another scam. What I watched unfold was both painful and predictable. Within minutes, their tone changed. Suddenly, I wasn't the extra expense dragging them down. I was a potential source of wealth. Their eyes lit up, their voices softened, their interest in my well-being became urgent. It stung more than I expected. To see affection return so easily, not because of love, but because of numbers on a check. Yet, beneath the hurt, I felt something else: confirmation. My instincts weren't paranoia. The cameras caught every shift, every calculation, every false reassurance. That fake call was only a spark. What came next revealed the fire underneath, the tightening net they were weaving around me in the name of protection. After that fake call, the pressure around me grew heavier. Jason and Brianna no longer spoke about moving me out right away. Instead, they shifted the conversation toward money management, speaking softly, as if the new tone made their intentions noble. They framed it as protection, how elderly people like me could be taken advantage of, how scams and bad investments could ruin a life overnight. Their solution was simple: set up a joint account. Let them oversee deposits, withdrawals, and anything unusual. The proposal came with limits, too. They suggested I keep only $500 for personal expenses while they monitored everything else. The rest, they said, could be invested conservatively, for my own good. What they meant was for their control. I remember sitting there, nodding, keeping my voice calm, though inside, I felt the walls closing in. Imagine living your whole life, raising a family, paying bills, keeping a household running, and then being told you couldn't be trusted with your own money. The cameras captured every phrase, every calculated pause. They didn't see me as capable. They saw me as an obstacle between themselves and what they believed they deserved. It was 7:30 in the morning when everything came to a head. I was making breakfast, scrambling eggs the way I always did, when Jason and Brianna walked in. But this time, they didn't sit down casually. They positioned themselves with purpose: Jason by the doorway, Brianna between me and the phone. The message was clear: they wanted control, and they wanted it now. Their voices carried that false calm I had come to recognize, the kind people use when they're about to deliver something unpleasant. They spoke of my judgment, of how concerning it was that I resisted their help. They hinted that maybe I wasn't thinking clearly anymore, that perhaps medical professionals should evaluate my ability to manage my own affairs. I listened, letting their words sink in, but inside, I was steady. I wasn't the one being cornered. I had been waiting for this moment. I turned toward the decorative bowl on the counter and allowed myself the smallest smile. Then, as naturally as if I were greeting an old friend, I spoke not to Jason or Brianna, but to the hidden lens inside that bowl. I asked if we had captured enough. The silence that followed was sharper than any accusation. Their eyes widened, confusion shifting quickly to fear. I lifted the bowl and revealed the tiny camera they had overlooked for weeks. I explained, calmly, that every threat, every scheme, every whisper about accidents and conservatorship had been recorded, not just by me, but under the guidance of Alex Rivera, who at that very moment stepped out from the pantry, equipment in hand. The air seemed to leave the room. Jason's shoulders collapsed, and Brianna's polished composure cracked into panic. I told them the truth: the supposed sweepstakes win had been nothing but bait. In reality, I had already claimed $63,400 money I had carefully left untouched while I documented how they treated me when they thought I had nothing. In that moment, the balance of power shifted completely. I wasn't the vulnerable one. They were. Later that day, when the cameras were off and the house was heavy with silence, it was Noah and Lily who broke my heart the most. Noah, at 16, understood too much. His anger was sharp, directed at everyone them for scheming, me for exposing it so publicly, life for being unfair. I could see him wrestling with the fact that his parents were not who he thought they were. Lily was softer, more fragile. She asked questions that trembled, like whether I was really leaving, whether she would still get to see me. Holding her, I felt the weight of promises I couldn't fully keep. Nothing would ever be the same again. And children deserve stability, not scandal. I told them the truth that if their parents had shown patience and kindness, I had planned to pay off debts, secure college funds, even build a better life for them all. Instead, greed stole that future. Soon after, the recordings made their way to the police. A detective from the Financial Crimes Unit sat across from me, asking if I wanted to press charges. It was the hardest question of all. A part of me still saw Jason as my little boy, but another part knew exactly what would have happened if I stayed silent. Mercy without boundaries isn't love, it's permission. I chose boundaries. The indictments came down quickly. Conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse. For Brianna, an added charge for making threats against an elderly person. Words she thought were whispers in the dark were now evidence on official paper. The fallout spread fast. Jason lost his position at the dealership. They couldn't afford to keep someone accused of preying on his own mother. Brianna's pharmaceutical company placed her on unpaid leave. Her polished image suddenly fractured. Neighbors stopped waving on the sidewalk. Friends went quiet. At 10 o'clock one morning, I walked into the courthouse to testify. I carried not just my story, but the weight of years spent as mother, grandmother, and now witness. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing a line so clearly that even the law had to recognize it. Months later, Alex's documentary aired. What began as hidden cameras in my kitchen became an hour-long special broadcast into homes across the country. I remember sitting in my new living room, the screen glowing as strangers listened to my story. It wasn't dressed up for shock value. Alex chose to focus on the larger pattern of elder abuse, how easily it hides behind polite smiles and family obligations. I hadn't wanted fame. I only wanted protection. But the impact was bigger than me. Letters and emails began arriving. Elderly men and women, and even their children, reached out with stories that sounded far too familiar. Some whispered their thanks in grocery store aisles. Others admitted they didn't know where to turn until they saw me stand up. It was a strange twist. The very thing meant to silence me became the spark that gave voice to so many others. Not long after the trial, I decided I couldn't keep living in the same house that had witnessed so much deceit. I found a modest 3-bedroom place about 10 minutes away. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I signed the papers at 3:45 in the afternoon, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing freely. The house had space for visits from Noah and Lily, but not enough room for anyone to mistake it as theirs to control. I planted flowers on the porch, learned which spots caught the morning sun, and filled the kitchen with simple comforts. It became a place where boundaries were clear, family was welcome, manipulation was not. Noah dropped by after work sometimes, his shoulders lighter now that he was carving his own path. Lily would text me little updates about school and come help bake cookies on weekends. In those quiet moments, I realized I wasn't disappearing from their lives. I was simply creating a healthier way to stay connected. With the winnings I hadn't touched, I felt a responsibility heavier than any check I could write. My story wasn't unique, it was just one that happened to be caught on camera. That thought stayed with me, echoing louder each time I read another letter from someone living the same nightmare. So, I started the Marion Brooks Foundation for Elder Dignity. It began in a small rented office at 9 in the morning one spring day. Just a desk, a phone, and a mission to protect older adults from the kind of abuse I had endured. We funded lawyers to fight back against fraudulent conservatorships. We created safe housing for those forced out of their homes. We helped families rebuild when trust had been broken beyond repair. In the first year alone, we served 89 cases. By the third year, we had grown into 12 states, overturning 73 illegal conservatorships and helping recover over $8 million in stolen assets. But beyond the numbers, what mattered most was dignity. I saw faces light up when people realized they weren't powerless. I watched children learn that respect for their elders isn't optional. When Jason and Brianna walked out of prison, they were not the same people who had once stood in my kitchen with threats hidden in their smiles. The time apart broke them. They divorced quietly, each blaming the other for what had happened. Jason took a job at a small used car lot in Pueblo, earning a fraction of what he once made. His voice, once confident and persuasive, carried a heaviness I had never heard before. Brianna moved back to her parents' house with Lily, living in the shadow of a reputation she could never quite scrub away. I saw them sometimes, at birthdays or graduations. The room always grew quieter when we stood near each other, as if everyone sensed the wound that time couldn't fully close. I didn't feel anger then, just a tired sadness for what could have been. If only they had chosen differently. Noah carried their mistakes as lessons. He studied business at Colorado State, determined to handle money with integrity. Lily found her passion in law, promising one day to defend people like me. In their choices, I saw a future that gave me hope. Looking back now, I realized the lottery win wasn't the true prize. The money gave me tools, yes, but the real victory was something deeper, reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my right to decide how I live. Family, I've learned, isn't only about blood. Sometimes the people who share your name can be the very ones who try to take your freedom. And sometimes, strangers like Alex and his team step in and become the family you didn't know you needed. Noah and Lily are my reminders that love can survive even the worst fractures. They chose to see truth, to learn from mistakes, and to walk a different path. For them, I will always keep my door open. At 72, I discovered something I wish every older person could feel, that age does not make you powerless. We are worth protecting, worth listening to, worth fighting for, and that more than $63 million feels like the real jackpot. If my story touched you, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment, or even tell me where you're listening from. Your voice matters. And together, we can remind the world that dignity is never optional.